The operators who watched Caterpillar walk away from the on-highway truck engine business already know how this story goes. They saw it in 2008, when Caterpillar announced its alliance with Navistar and quietly signaled it would rather exit the highway than re-engineer its diesels for the stricter 2010 emissions standards. By 2010, the yellow engine that once hauled freight across America was gone from the highway for good. Now look at Cummins. In December 2023, Cummins agreed to the largest Clean Air Act civil penalty in United States history, $1,675 million, over defeat device software, found on roughly 960,000 Ram, 2,500 and 3,500 trucks running the 6.7-liter Cummins diesel. This is a company that built its name on the N14, the bulletproof, rebuildable engine truckers worshipped through the 1990s. But the warning signs are now flashing on the dashboard of one of the most trusted names in American diesel, and they look almost exactly like the ones Caterpillar ignored. Let me be precise about what this is and what it is not. Cummins is not collapsing. It is a profitable, respected, globally dominant engine manufacturer, and the people who run its diesels still trust the hardware. This is not an obituary. It is a pattern recognition exercise, the kind a good fleet manager runs before a problem becomes a breakdown. Because the disease that hollowed out Caterpillar's on-highway reputation did not announce itself with a press release. It crept in through financial decisions, emissions, shortcuts, and a slow drift away from the engineering that earned the trust in the first place. If this is your first time here, subscribe. We document the corporate decisions inside the boardrooms that hollowed out one of the most respected industrial brands of the 20th century and the early signs of who is next. The data tells the story, and the data on Cummins right now deserves a careful read. Go back to what Cummins was, because the contrast is the whole point. The Cummins N14, the select-era N14 of the 1990s, was the engine you bought when you wanted to die of old age before the engine did. It displaced 14 liters. It was rated for well over 1 million miles before a major rebuild. And when it finally needed one, you could rebuild it. That word, rebuildable, is sacred in this audience. It meant a mechanic in a gravel lot in Nebraska could pull the head, hone the cylinders, drop in new liners and pistons, and send the truck back out for another decade. The N14 was mechanical, in the way operators loved. You could diagnose it with your ears and your fingers, not a laptop and a subscription. Cummins did not build the N14 to be disposable. They built it to be the engine an owner-operator could stake a mortgage on. And for 15 years, that bet paid off on real roads, in real winters, hauling real freight. Understand how deep that rebuildability ran, because it shaped an entire culture. The N14 was a wet liner design, which means the cylinder liners were replaceable sleeves that dropped into the block and could be pulled and swapped without scrapping the whole engine. A worn-out N14 was never garbage. It was a core. There was an entire economy built on that idea. Independent rebuilders, in-frame overhaul kits sold over the counter, owner-operators who learned to do their own top-end work on a weekend. A man could buy a tired truck cheap, rebuild the N14 himself, and turn it into a paying asset because nobody could lock him out of his own engine. That culture was independence. It was a working man, owning the means of keeping himself on the road, and Cummins, in those years, built the hardware that made it possible. That reputation was not marketing. It was earned, dynopole by dynopole, rebuild by rebuild, across hundreds of thousands of trucks. When a brand earns that kind of trust from the most skeptical customers in the industrial world, it becomes a kind of inheritance. The danger is that an inheritance can be spent. And spending it usually starts in a boardroom with a spreadsheet and a decision that looks smart on a quarterly call and looks fatal 10 years later. Which brings us to the corpse. Caterpillar did not fail because it could not build a good truck engine. For decades, the Cat C15 and the engines before it were respected on the highway, hauling alongside the best Detroit and Cummins had to offer. Let nobody misremember this. The Cat C15 was not a weak engine. Operators chased it. They spec'd it on purpose, paid the premium for the yellow badge, and bragged about the acceleration of the higher output versions the way other men brag about horses. For a long stretch, a Cat-powered truck held its resale value precisely because the engine commanded respect. That is what makes the ending so instructive. Caterpillar did not lose the highway because the C-15 was bad. Caterpillar lost the highway because the people running Caterpillar decided the highway was not worth fighting for. In the middle of the 2000s, the Environmental Protection Agency was tightening the screws toward the 2010 emissions standards, the rules that would require serious investment in exhaust after treatment, in selective catalytic reduction, in the engineering needed to burn cleaner without sacrificing the durability customers expected. Caterpillar did the math and decided the on-highway truck engine business was not worth the re-engineering cost. In 2008, alongside an alliance with Navistar, Caterpillar announced it would exit the on-highway truck engine business entirely. By 2010, when those standards took effect, the CAT badge on a highway truck was history. And look at how that exit actually played out, because the Navistar alliance is the tell. Rather than do the hard work of engineering a clean 15-liter to meet the 2010 rules itself, Caterpillar leaned on a partnership and a badge engineering arrangement, putting its name on a different truck and engine strategy, and then letting even that fade. It was the move of a company that no longer wanted to build on highway engines. The respected C-15, the engine operators had spec'd and trusted, was allowed to become a memory rather than the foundation of the next generation. A company can own a genuinely great product customers love and will pay extra for, and still decide that carrying it forward into a harder, cleaner future is a cost the spreadsheet would rather not bear. Think about what that decision actually traded. Caterpillar had one of the most respected engineering reputations in the entire industrial economy, a reputation built over generations, and it chose financial and strategic convenience over defending that reputation in the one arena where it had earned it. It walked away, rather than do the hard engineering work. And the broader pattern around that decision tells you everything about the culture that made it. This is a company that moved its headquarters out of Peoria, Illinois, the town it had been synonymous with for nearly a century, relocating to Chicago in 2017 and then to Irving, Texas in 2018, chasing tax advantages and proximity to capital markets rather than proximity to the factories and the workers who built the machines. Follow that move on a map, and you are watching a value system relocate. Peoria was where the iron was made, where the foundries ran and the engineers lived, down the road from the line workers. Chicago, in 2017, was a step toward the financial center. Irving, Texas, in 2018, was the final tilt toward capital market proximity, a headquarters chosen for what it does for the balance sheet, rather than what it does for the product. Caterpillar planted its flag a long way from the factory floor. This is a company that leaned hard into shareholder-first capital allocation, into dealer and parts strategies that locked customers into the ecosystem and away from the independent shops that kept the old iron running. Today, Caterpillar builds no on-highway truck engines at all. The reputation is still there in the dirt, on the dozers and the excavators, but on the highway, it is a memory. That is the corpse. That is where the road ends, when a company decides that defending its engineering legacy costs more than it is worth. Now hold that decision up against what is happening at Cummins, and watch the symptoms line up. In December 2023, Cummins agreed to pay $1,675 million to settle allegations that it installed defeat device software on its engines. The software was found on roughly 960,000 Ram 2500 and 3500 heavy-duty pickups. The trucks running the 6.7-liter Cummins diesel across model years 2013 through 2023. A defeat device, in plain terms, is software engineered to detect when the engine is being tested and to behave cleanly for the test, then to operate differently and dirtier out on the road. It is the same category of cheating that detonated Volkswagen's reputation a decade ago. The Environmental Protection Agency finalized the settlement in 2024, and when you add in the nationwide recall and the software fixes pushed out to those nearly 1 million trucks, the total cost runs north of $2 billion. Sit with that number for a moment, because it is not just a fine. $1,675 million is the largest Clean Air Act civil penalty in the history of the United States. Not the largest for an engine maker. The largest, period. And the reason it matters here is not the dollar figure, which Cummins can absorb. It is what the dollar figure represents. It represents a decision, somewhere in the company, to take an emissions shortcut rather than do the honest, expensive engineering. It is the exact category of choice Caterpillar made in 2008, dressed in different clothes. Caterpillar decided the clean engineering cost was too high and walked away from the segment. Cummins, the settlement alleges, decided the clean engineering cost was too high and wrote software to fake it. Different mechanism, same route, a financial calculation winning over an engineering principle. It is worth being concrete about why the clean engineering bill got so heavy, because the modern diesel is a different animal from the N14, and not in a way operators celebrate. To meet the 2010 standards and everything after them, manufacturers bolted on a stack of aftertreatment systems, each one a new place for the truck to fail. Selective catalytic reduction sprays a urea solution, the diesel exhaust fluid, into the exhaust to break down nitrogen oxides, which means a dosing module, sensors, a heated tank, and a fluid the operator now has to buy and carry. The diesel particulate filter traps soot and burns it off in a regeneration cycle. And when those regenerations go wrong, the filter clogs, the engine derates, and the truck crawls home in limp mode. The exhaust gas recirculation cooler routes hot exhaust back into the intake to lower combustion temperatures, and that cooler, baking and cooling thousands of times, becomes one of the most notorious failure points on a modern diesel. Stack those together and you have replaced a mechanical engine a man could rebuild with a chemical electronic system. A man can only diagnose with a factory scan tool. Every one of those systems is governed by software, and software is exactly where a defeat device lives. The same complexity the regulators demanded gave the managers somewhere to hide the cheat. And the symptom that should worry the operators most is not the fine itself, it is what surrounds it. The recall touched nearly 1 million trucks. Those software fixes, the ones pushed out to bring the engines into compliance, are exactly the kind of change owners notice in the worst way, in fuel economy, in regeneration cycles, in the creeping sense that the engine is now managed by code they cannot see and cannot rebuild. That is the drift. The N14 was a machine you could fix with your hands. The modern emissions-burdened diesel is increasingly a machine you fix with a subscription, a dealer scan tool, and a parts channel that only the manufacturer controls. Selective catalytic reduction systems, diesel particulate filters, exhaust gas recirculation coolers, the diesel exhaust fluid dosing modules, every one of them a new failure point, every one of them a new line item the manufacturer can meter. None of that is the engine's fault, and none of it is the operator's fault. It is the consequence of management choosing complexity and dependency over the rebuildable simplicity that built the brand. Look closely at what each of those systems does to the relationship between the operator and his engine, because this is where the business model hides. In the N14 era, the manufacturer sold you an engine once, and then got out of the way. The independent shop, the over-the-counter parts kit, the owner who did his own work, those were the players who kept the truck alive, and the money flowed to them. The modern aftertreatment stack inverts that. Each new sensor and module is a part with a part number only the manufacturer's network reliably supplies. Each derate event, where the truck's own software chokes the engine down to force you into a shop, is a leash the manufacturer holds. The whole architecture quietly moves the long-term money away from the independent mechanic and toward a controlled, dealer-centered channel. That is not a side effect that executives regret. For a finance-led management team, that captive revenue is the prize. The emissions rules supplied the excuse, but the lock-in is the business those rules made possible. This is the part where the parallel sharpens into something uncomfortable. Caterpillar's decline on the highway was not one dramatic event. It was a culture that learned to value the financial outcome over the engineering legacy, until walking away from the legacy felt like the rational thing to do. The headquarters moved toward the money. The capital allocation tilted toward the shareholder. The parts and dealer strategy tilted toward lock-in. And when the hard emissions engineering bill came due, the culture that had been optimizing for finance for years simply declined to pay it. The defeat device settlement is, in that light, a single, visible symptom of a much older question. Is Cummins still a company that does the hard engineering even when it is expensive? Or is it becoming a company that runs the financial calculation first and lets the engineering follow? $1 billion $675 million is one data point. The question is whether it is the first or the 10th. Here in 2026, the honest answer is that we do not know yet, and that uncertainty is exactly why this is worth watching rather than mourning. Cummins is still building engines that operators rely on every single day. The X-15 still pulls hard. The company still posts strong revenue, still commands respect, still employs some of the best diesel engineers in the world. The brand is not on the highway exit ramp the way Caterpillar was in 2008. But the fork is real, and the company is standing at it. One road leads back toward the N14 philosophy: durable, honest, rebuildable, worth the engineering cost. The other road is the one Caterpillar took, where every quarter the financial logic gets a little louder and the engineering principle gets a little quieter, until one day the badge that meant everything to operators means nothing on the road they drive. The MBA culture does not see it as a betrayal, and that is what makes it dangerous. To the executives optimizing the spreadsheet, the defeat device shortcut and the parts lock-in and the relentless cost-cutting on emissions compliance are not abandonment of principle. They are simply efficient capital allocation. Harvard Business School does not teach a class on the sacred trust between an owner-operator and a rebuildable diesel. Wall Street does not assign a line item to the reputation that took 50 years to build. So the reputation gets spent, quietly, in decisions that each look defensible in isolation, and add up to something the operators recognize long before the analysts do. Caterpillar's people on the line probably saw it coming years before the press release. The operators running Cat Power saw the parts prices climb and the dealer dependency tighten, and felt the direction of travel in their fuel bills and their repair invoices. They knew before the boardroom would admit it. Notice the timeline if you lay it end to end, because the sequence is the warning. Caterpillar made its on-highway exit in 2008. Then came the long financial drift, the headquarters leaving Peoria for Chicago in 2017 and for Irving, Texas in 2018. The engineering exit came first, the financial relocation followed. Now watch the order of events at Cummins. The defeat device software was running on engines from 2013 through 2023, a full decade of an emissions shortcut, before the December 2023 settlement and the 2024 finalization dragged it into the light. A decade. That is not a single bad quarter, or one rogue engineer. That is a span long enough to be a posture, a way of resolving the tension between the regulator's demand and the shareholder's expectation, repeated year after year, until somebody outside the building finally counted the cost at over $2 billion. The operators do not need a court document to read a posture. They read it in the limp mode events and the invoices. If you have run a Cummins diesel, an N14, a 6.7, any of them, drop the engine and the truck in the comments, and tell me whether you trust where Cummins is heading. Let us see how many of us spotted the warning signs early, on real roads and real job sites, before any boardroom admitted them. Because that is the real lesson the Caterpillar corpse leaves behind. The operators and mechanics who watched Caterpillar walk away from its engine reputation saw the pattern long before any executive stood up and made it official. They did not need a settlement document or a quarterly call to know what was happening. The fuel bills told them. The recalls told them. The slow creep of parts dependency and dealer lock-in told them, invoice by invoice, breakdown by breakdown, in the language operators actually speak, which is the language of what it costs to keep a truck running. By the time Caterpillar made it official in 2008, the people in the cabs and the bays had already known for years. So here is the question worth arguing about, and I genuinely want the comment section to fight about this one. Can Cummins break the pattern that Caterpillar never even tried to break? Can a company with this much financial pressure and this much emissions complexity choose the N14 road, the hard engineering road, when every incentive on Wall Street and every reflex from business school pushes it toward the other one? Caterpillar had the chance and chose convenience. Cummins still has the chance. The defeat device settlement says the financial calculation has already won at least once. The next decade says whether it wins for good. The operators who saw it coming already know which way the smart money is betting. Subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.